So Prime Minister this week visiting an informal meeting of EU leaders in Brussels after he sees the NATO Secretary General as well. So defence is firmly on his agenda for this trip. From the EU side, there's a lot going on in terms of defence, partly as a result of the war in Ukraine, and also now that there's a new EU Commissioner for specifically defence and space. So they're going to be looking at a wide range of issues. Specifically for the UK, it's about how to engage with the EU's security and defence structures post-Brexit, which has still been an elusive task on both sides since the vote to leave in 2016. Prior to the election in July last year, the Labour Party were talking about an ambitious EU-UK defence and security pact. However, actually, in the last almost 12 months now, it's very, very light on the details. So I think this meeting will actually start to kick off that period of negotiations, but the UK is really going to firmly have to say, well, this is actually what we want from it. It's fine talking up the ambition, but you need to put detail on the table at some point. And I think after this meeting, that will really be sort of the time to really look into that from both sides. I think the key consideration probably for both sides at the moment, it's less of a UK-EU discussion and narrative. It's more about NATO and the EU in terms of figuring out high level where NATO is going to focus on in terms of defence going forward, where the EU is going to focus on defence going forward, and the need for those to complement. And actually out of that discussion and conversation, you're likely to then see the areas where the UK could plug into the EU, in addition to what it already does bilaterally with members, to work out where the value lies on both sides. But actually, when you start to unpick that, it's probably less cooperation within defence, but also more that wider security issues, talking about homeland security, resilience, etc. And that might be where some of those areas of collaboration are actually more important. I think this is where we have to look at defence and security in the wider context of UK-EU relations. Sometimes, it's referred to as the low-hanging fruit, that actually there's certain areas of cooperation, seeing as the UK actually set up what is the current EU defence and security structures from 1998, that there's actually some quick wins in there, which might be right, but the difficulty is actually separating defence and security out and insulating it from all of those wider policy areas. There's already movement within the EU to say, well, actually, you need to look at a youth mobility scheme, you need to look at fisheries as well. And at the moment, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, which governs the post-Brexit relations between the UK and the EU, does not include defence and security. So there's an element of content here about what those particular agreements are going to entail. There's also an element about governance. Do you try and keep defence and security on its own in its pact? Do you include it within the Trade and Cooperation Agreement? Or is this also a process, and the start of a process is gaining a rather vanilla agreements on defence and security and something that can be built up to into a much wider deal with the UK-EU?